Patrick Phillips is an independent journalist, activist, and political commentator known for his controversial views on a wide range of topics, including alternative health, geoengineering, government overreach, and global institutions. His work challenges mainstream narratives and often delves into crime, which he frames as explorations of underreported truths. September 11th and false flags being a prime example. Patrick's brand of journalism is investigative and critical, often seeking to expose hidden agendas behind global governance, public health policies, and environmental manipulation. Patrick rose to prominence in Ecuador during 2020 when his outspoken criticism of mask mandates, government lockdowns, and public health measures brought him into the spotlight. He likened the quarantine restrictions to dictatorships in Latin America during the 1970s and 80s, emphasizing the loss of civil liberties and overreach of government power. His views garnered both support and controversy, particularly due to his belief that intubation and other medical procedures cause many deaths in Ecuador. This led to public clashes with Ecuadorian politicians and health authorities, further increasing his visibility. Patrick's background also includes a strong interest in geoengineering and climate control. He is a vocal opponent of aerosol spraying, referred to as solar radiation management, and climate manipulation programs, believing these activities are conducted by governments and global institutions to exert control over the climate and, by extension, population. Patrick consistently warns against centralized governance, particularly by global institutions like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, which he believes undermine local autonomy and personal freedoms and, under the guise of progress, form new hierarchies. A significant part of Patrick's journalistic background focuses on questioning mainstream health narratives, particularly around HIV/AIDS and viruses. He is skeptical of the link between HIV and AIDS, having studied and promoted alternative explanations, including the role of drugs in immune deficiency. His AIDS Foundation on Facebook serves as a platform for those who believe antiretroviral therapy does more harm than good. Patrick was very influenced by Dr. Stefan Lanka and the measles court case in Germany, which put the original studies around virus cell culture into the spotlight. Despite his controversial stance, Patrick has built a following on platforms like BitChute, where he discusses these subjects outside of the constraints of traditional media. His independent journalism is heavily focused on civil liberties, regional sovereignty, and resistance to what he sees as the harmful agendas of global institutions. So, Patrick, what are you aspiring for in the world today, and how do you believe your work contributes to that vision?
Well, there's an expression, I love it. It's think globally, act locally.
Think globally, act locally.
And we have seen that activists on a local level are able to affect change. A lot of the times people object to this kind of activism because they say there's nothing they can do. There's 9 billion people in the world, so what can I do to make a difference? But if you look at the way political activism has always happened, it's always started out on the local level. And I believe my work contributes to that vision more than anything because I want to be an example. How can you have this knowledge and not want to share it? And I think a lot of people, if they were brought to the point where they were aware of the sort of things we talk about, they would be compelled also to share it. Now, there's a lot of positivity to what I do. I'm critical of global institutions and mainstream narratives in the sense that I analyze them. But on the flip side of that alarmism, there's a lot of positivity. There's new concerns that are raised, but it's good to know, oh no, we don't have to be so preoccupied with global warming, but there's other things that then come up, like the governments manipulating the weather, or we can say that Muslims weren't responsible for September 11th. And so there is a lot of positivity, but the flip side of that is we see who's really pulling the strings, and that for a lot of people can be scary. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried a year ago. I had withdrawn from social media. I was only publishing on BitChute because I didn't want to put myself out there in a way that I could lose my peace. And I felt like if I was going to do any kind of further political work on YouTube and on Facebook, it would have to be collaborative. So I was just waiting, seeing what could happen, and then we launched this project, and voila. So sometimes you have to just be willing to see what happens. But I want to be an example, because I don't want my grandchildren to come to me and tell me, Patrick, what were you doing when the global fascists came and took away our rights? And I don't want to have to tell them I was sitting on my butt, doing nothing. Even if it's hopeless, and even if there's no change that can be affected, I at least want to be an example to register at this time in history. There were those who didn't go along.
In your view, what are the root causes of international conflicts, and how should they be addressed to foster global peace?
Well, the root conflicts go back to the philosophical underpinnings of our political order, namely liberalism and the unipolarity that has created. We often feel like world events take us by surprise. But for those of us who have been reading the documents of the elite, where they tell us what they're planning, we're not taken by surprise, because they will tell you what they're planning ahead of time. But there needs to be a new philosophical, political way of analyzing the world that goes beyond the ideological conflicts of the 20th century, like communism, fascism. And the world has seen the wisdom of rejecting communism and fascism, but we need to also now reject liberalism and move towards a multipolar world where the United States isn't trying to be the world's policeman.
How do you see the role of independent journalism evolving in the age of digital media and increasing government surveillance?
When I got into the political activism, Holly, as part of the 9/11 Truth Movement, 2004, 2005, 2006, there was so many documentaries that were made about September 11th. And I thought that with time, that people would connect the dots. And then I started reading more and more about these other crimes that the government was involved in. But then slowly I started to realize something about independent journalism. Even though there are journalists that contribute great things to our understanding of how American politics works, they all hate each other. And there's rivalries. Independent journalism is very competitive, and they don't talk to each other. And so major discoveries are made in independent journalism, and the other independent journalists don't know about it. It's very competitive. There's a lot of rivalries. They get angry at each other. So, for example, somebody like Noam Chomsky, he won't talk with a lot of the other researchers, even though he's someone who's so respected as a critic of American foreign policy. He hates other alternative journalists, and is very divided. Also, now with the censorship, it's hard to know where it'll go. I guess we're all waiting to see what happens in a couple of weeks with the American presidential election, and things can change for the good, and things can change for the worse in ways that we don't even know. Digital media has become a lot more restrictive since since I got into this.
Given your skepticism of mainstream health narratives, what advice would you offer to individuals seeking alternative health information?
Well, that's a great question, Holly. We have to do our own research. And I think there's this idea that science and medicine is homogeneous, that it speaks with one voice, but we need to be the media, and we've seen how our ideas about health really affect the way we live day to day. And I would encourage everybody to look at the 5 biological laws, what is often called German New Medicine, for a macro level understanding. And that helps take the fear away from disease. You see that the body has its own wisdom. A lot of people who work around the AIDS issue, they get into it when it's personal, maybe for whatever reason, they have a positive test. But it shouldn't be that way, because if it's something out there that's happening to one person, it's happening to everyone. And one of the things that I know that people in the Middle East and in Latin America aren't aware of is that in the United States right now, there's a chronic disease epidemic. And they followed the official counts to the T for the most part. So something's not working with, and a lot of it could have to do also with regulatory capture of these regulatory agencies. But we have to do our own research, and we have to look at what all doctors are saying, not just the doctors that work for the pharmaceutical companies.
With your extensive focus on environmental issues like geoengineering, what practical steps do you believe individuals and communities can take to more effectively advocate for environmental protection and accountability?
Well, I love that question, because it goes back to what we were saying at the start, that it's really at the local level that we can see change. Most counties in the United States have local media. At least in California, and other states are like that too. I know they are. There's local radio stations, local newspapers, there are local magazines, and some of the most radical, most outside the box thinking goes on those, public access stations, local radio waves. And so people need to get involved on the local level, handing out flyers, whatever they can do. Kentucky recently passed a law in their house, in the Kentucky Congress, because every state has a Congress. They passed a law outlawing geoengineering. Ultimately it's symbolic, but there are things people can do to raise awareness about things like geoengineering. Just, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Show the pictures of the fake clouds. And, fluoride, I know that's a big issue in Ecuador as well, where the salt has fluoride in it. If people just became aware and shared the information, it could have a big effect. It depends where you are, because different parts of the world have different challenges.
Yeah, and that leads us to this question. You've been an activist to the US and in Ecuador. Are the reactions different? Are there different challenges?
Yeah, so I feel like in a lot of ways, Ecuador is like the United States was in the 1950s, where there was one media. It was very much just one culture. My grandparents had come out of World War II, and that really united the culture. Ecuador is a harmony culture. In the United States, it's very much divided into subcultures, and we're seeing this division a lot in this election season. So in the United States, often they will have a negative reaction to what you're reporting as a journalist, because it bumps up against their political colors. So for example, maybe somebody in the United States identifies with a political party, and they think that as a good Republican or as a good Democrat, they shouldn't be looking at this issue. In Ecuador, it's not like that. I get the feeling like they think that in order for the society to function, they need to trust in authority. And if that goes, then there's much more of a collective belief system. I don't know if it's that they don't believe me about like fluoride being a poison and these other things. It's just like it's too much to think about, too much to entertain. But this kind of compliance and this passivity it can be very dangerous. Now, what we saw in 2020, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was leading up to it. People had been gradually giving away their freedoms. They gradually been adopting an idea of genetics that led to the faith in the PCR testing and all that. But I was reflecting earlier today about how the businesses, we're complaining now that we don't have power. We're complaining when there's quarantines, when things that are happening in the environment and the economy affect the businesses. But a better way to approach these things is when times are good, when we're prospering. That's when it's the time to push for more freedoms. And because once they're taken away from us, that's too late. I think we're seeing that we need to be involved on a community level. It's going to be a hard sell in Ecuador because there's strong emotional reactions to, like this, you mentioned how intubation was killing the ventilators were killing the people, and there's a lot of evidence now that's come out that it was hospital protocols that were killing the people. But if the people in Ecuador, if they believe that, then, oh, so the doctors are not heroes, they're killers, and that's too much to entertain. So a lot of times I don't tackle these things directly, but I try to introduce the science and talk around it. But there's a lot of apathy. There's a lot of apathy. In the United States right now, it's very divided, and things could really change in the next few weeks with a new president. And so that's part of what I'm excited about, the possibility of another Trump